today, but first I want to get our legal panel's take. Joining me now is senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Jeffrey Toobin, also legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Sonny Hostin. On the defense side, criminal defense attorneys Danny Savalos and Mark Garagos, co-author of Mistrial, an inside look at how the criminal justice system works and sometimes doesn't. So all four of you, I just want to throw this question out to all four of you. Do any of you believe that the prosecution had a particularly good day today? Does anybody believe that the prosecution is a step closer to proving their case? Mark, go ahead.
Anderson, I have a theory about this. I think that what has happened here, Jeff, I have no evidence of this, so I'll say that as a disclaimer. But I think that when the police did not arrest him, as Mark O'Mara elicited, they found him to be credible. They thought that they weren't going to file. I think that what has happened here is that when the state's attorney filed this case, they feel like the police were thrown under the bus. And I think the police are now engaging in payback. And when those questions that O'Mara asked, to get those answers out of the officers, to me, is stunning. And Anderson, I assume your question was almost a hypothetical, because no, they're not a step closer. This was a disastrous day for the prosecution.
Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
For the first time in perhaps history, I agree completely with what Mark said. I had a feeling that the cops were really going out of their way to be sympathetic to Zimmerman today. You know, of course he didn't ask for a lawyer. He immediately talked to us. He was truthful. He was honest. We tried, our special investigative techniques. They even asked him about the inconsistencies, and he said, "Oh, I didn't think they were really such big inconsistencies. Everybody tells a story somewhat different." I mean, they sounded like defense attorneys. These cops.
Let me play one more piece of an interview with the female police officer talking about whether or not George Zimmerman exhibited any ill will or malice. Let's take a listen.
Did he evidence that he was angry with Trayvon Martin?
No.
That he had hatred for him?
No.
Spite or ill will?
No.
That he had anything that would suggest to you some type of bad attitude towards Trayvon Martin?
No.
Rather, he seemed to be affected by the fact that he realized that Trayvon Martin had passed?
He seemed affected by that.
Danny, that's a state's witness.
This is brilliant, and it's brilliant. It's so nuanced. What Mark O'Mara is doing is literally reading out of the statute. The statute defines the state has the burden to prove depraved heart. Well, what does that mean? They have to prove three separate things. One of those is ill will, evil, hatred. That's where those questions come from. He is literally getting his closing argument prepared by asking about that evil or ill will. So now he's establishing that at least one witness is going to negate that ill will. And if you negate one, this is a giant Jenga game. If you negate one of those elements, the entire case fails. And it is Florida law that an impulsive overreaction to a fight or an attack is not ill will or evil.
Sonny Hostin, did you see anything different there? Anything positive for the prosecution?
Yeah, I did see some positives, but I'm going to agree with Mark as well. I mean, certainly we got to remember that these are the same police officers that the investigation was taken from and their power was usurped. And I'm sure that they were a little bit upset about it. And I think some of that came across on the witness stand. But when you look at George Zimmerman's statements, he did call Trayvon Martin repeatedly a suspect. He also said these guys always get away. I think something that's very interesting to take away as well is that he talked about Serino said he didn't feel that George Zimmerman's injuries were life-threatening. He also said he didn't believe that George Zimmerman went down with a single punch. And so I think what's most important is that we also got out those inconsistencies when it talks about who was the first aggressor, right? Because I think that's really going to be the most important issue here. And I think it was pretty clear that at first he said, he told Singleton, well, I got out of the car just to get an address. Well, you know what? There are only 3 streets at this retreat at Twin Lakes. So the fact that the neighborhood watch coordinator didn't know one of 3 streets seems very odd and just incredible. And I think the other thing is he finally admitted sort of that, listen, he got out and he was following him. And I think that when you look at it all in context, yes, maybe his statements were consistent. They are his statements, his self-serving statements, but there was a lot for the prosecution to work with given those statements.
Just very briefly, is it possible, I mean, the second degree murder is what he's charged with. Is it possible for the jury to, on their own, say, well, we don't think it's second-degree murder, but maybe it should be manslaughter? I mean, is that within the power of the jury to?
Well, if they,
Yes.
the jury has to go what's called a lesser included. They get a jury instruction. If they give lessers, the jury they have to work from top to bottom. But if they acquit on second degree and they get a lesser of manslaughter, yes, they can find him guilty or not guilty of that.
You will find prosecutors who believe that you should always charge the absolute most you can and let the jury compromise to something you can live with.
Doesn't that make the closing argument and the prosecution's case a little harder to argue?
That's what other prosecutors think, which is if you overcharge, you wind up discrediting your whole case. I mean, you can argue either way. The problem here is they're not establishing any kind of case, at least on a day like today, as far as I could tell. But again, I don't think we should overemphasize one day. There's a lot of evidence in this case.
Right. Just ahead, though, more of George Zimmerman. In his own words, what he told police about the night he killed Trayvon Martin. Do all of his statements and interviews match up? Sonny talked about some inconsistencies. We'll show you what he said. Plus, we'll take you inside the dangerous world of the Granite Mountain hotshots, what it takes to join their ranks, and what they face on the job.